Welcome to our study of Traleg Kyabgon's desire, why it matters. And the reason why it matters, is because desire is what underpins all our actions. And sometimes these desires are misguided, and sometimes they're intelligent. So we could say the whole Buddhist path is really about beginning to inform our desire with wisdom rather than ignorance. Now, when we're looking at this, and in general, when we're studying anything in Buddhism, we're looking at a science that is the scope of which is our mind. And the point I'm often making is this science is no less scientific, if you like. It's no less valid. It's no less empirical. It's no less verifiable than what we normally in the materialist context refer to as natural sciences or science. But because our culture and our circumstances and of course individual disposition and so forth, very often we're not that aware of what's happening in our mind. Now, the moment that we approach Buddhism, there's two angles that we come at the mind from. And one is, of course, a theoretical analysis where we're looking at the mind, we're asserting what's happening in the mind, the relationship between the cause and effect of what's happening in our mind. And the other is, and that's, you could say, analytical, intellectual through studying theory. And the other is as practitioners of meditation. The moment that we begin to meditate, we are familiarizing ourselves with what is happening in our mind. And when we meditate, we're not sitting down and sort of zoning into some very rarefied particular state. Rather, we are becoming familiar with the mind and working intelligently with the mind, but it's a direct felt experience. And so as we begin to explore this neighborhood of our mind, then the theory, it's a bit like if you like I was saying to somebody the other day, it's like you move into a new neighborhood and somebody gives you a map. Initially, you look at the map and say, well, that doesn't mean much to me. But as you begin to move around in the neighborhood, actually, then the map makes a lot of sense and you discover a lot of things that you might not necessarily know through just making your own way. And also, having made your own way, having some experience, then the map is no longer just sort of unrelatable, it's very applicable. So as we're practitioners of meditation, the theory makes sense, and also the theory itself motivates us to work with our mind as we do it on the path in meditation, post-meditation, and so forth. So you could say there's a cycle in which theory and practice, they work together. So, so presently then we are in the third chapter. So here, let's see. How reality challenges our subjective experience. Now, the title itself is very interesting because what we're saying here is we hold one view, how things are, but the thing is reality is a bit bigger than that. And what we're going to be looking at more and more is, of course, how our construction and our personal sort of take on reality might not be that accurate. And so actually, the degree to which we're more open to our world, our reality, the more accurate actually we begin to see things. We open up. And that's where our subjective, you could say, narrow-minded perspective is replaced by a wider perspective. Now, one thing, so Traleg Kyabgon says, not becoming fixated on certainty is important. That does not mean that everything happens randomly. So of course, what we are taught in Buddhism is that phenomena, they are not how they appear. They're impermanent. They we overlook their nature. And so they're not as predictable as we would like. We very often operate with a notion of how things are, and we'd like them to stay in a particular way, but they're not. We might not even have really understood things properly in the first place. Now, things not being as we think they are doesn't mean that there's no sense to be made of it. It doesn't mean that everything happens randomly. So our tendency is to fixate. We tend to focus on an aspect of reality, but that collides with reality in the sense that the way that we focus on a very minor part of the picture, unfortunately, doesn't really convey the totality of the picture. So we're very often confronted with how things aren't working out the way that we would like them to, or how they are. So this reality is not fixed. It doesn't mean it's random. So it doesn't mean we give up on reality. It just, like we very often say, you know, the universe is speaking to us. The universe is sending us messages. Things are impermanent. Things don't exist the way we think they do. So that's where, when we begin to be less stubborn, less aggressive, less fixated, and if we can remain open to reality, then we begin to, you could say, dance better with reality. We handle reality better. This is not easy. Nobody's saying it is. But the good thing is, with the Dharma, we have actually a science around this. So we're very fortunate in that regard. So reality not being necessarily what we want it to be, then we can't really depend on it to sort of cater to us. And that's where, rather than be dependent on circumstances, it's better if we have some harmony and balance within ourselves. If we have some confidence in ourselves, then we're not going to be thrown off balance by these unpredictable, uncertain circumstances. The thing is, if we didn't have, even if we don't have that kind of balance inside, then even things are actually progressing nicely. We're still going to be suffering from a basic insecurity, a basic angst, and even sort of ordinary, orderly circumstances, they can throw us too. So, of course, what we're doing then, in terms of the Buddhist path, is we're training the mind. And Traleg Kyabgon speaks about self-cultivation. Of course, what we're talking about there is beginning to take some things in our own hands. We're beginning to develop some autonomy. We're beginning to not rely on the other in the sense of the circumstances, not be dependent on, but we're beginning to rather work with ourselves. And it's through working with ourselves then actually things are, we can accept things as they are. Then we can, once we're sort of settled in ourselves, we can basically handle circumstances. There's a very famous, and made me think of it's not in the text, in Traleg Kyabgon's text, but there's a famous quote that many of you would have seen before. It's from the 5th chapter of the Bodhicharyavatara, the chapter on vigilant introspection. And it says, in the Shantideva says, to cover all the earth with sheets of leather, where could such amounts of skin be found? But with the leather soles of just my shoes, it is as though I cover all the earth. And thus the outer course of things I myself cannot restrain, but let me just restrain my mind, and what is left to be restrained. So if we could practice self-cultivation, if we could work with our mind, then everything else will basically be taken care of. Doing just that. So on the path of Dharma, we train the mind and we see through the delusion of self. So when we're talking about self-cultivation, it doesn't mean that we're going to build up the ego, but Rather, it means that we begin to build up our prajna, we begin to become wiser. And that's where also the insecurity of the basic delusion of self is seen through. And that's where we then attain what we call anatta, or we're on the path to anatta or anatman, the absent no discovery of no self. So through this path, we can better engage with the world as a richer person. So when we begin to discover no self, that also means that we are able to relate more freely. We're taking out the thing that actually blocks our relationship with the world. I was just looking at a book written by an American neuroscientist and psychologist. I forget his name, but he wrote a book called No Self, No Problem. It sounds, that's annoyingly simple, but it of course reflects a profound truth. And also the thing is, when we are no longer struggling with this imposition of our insecure self, then also things are smoother and we begin to have a greater sense of our own worth and the worth of others. We're richer people. The thing is, when we go the other way and we become very caught up in ourselves and we suffer as a consequence, then through this kind of condition of self-absorption, we become negative about ourselves and we become negative about others. Why? This happens. And we're not making a proposition here. This is probably something that many of us, certainly myself, this is familiar. Yeah. So that's where there's a vicious cycle. We become cynical, we become nihilistic, and there's not really a lot of joy in terms of our existence. What we're doing with the path through the development of insight, and this we do gradually through hearing the teaching, hearing the Dharma, thinking about it. And when we think about it, we think critically, how does this relate to my experience? And then we begin to integrate this, particularly through the practice of meditation, beginning to connect freely with our reality. And these three, what we call the prajnas of hearing, reflecting, and meditating, this enables us to develop an understanding of the human condition, for one, the situation we're in, and also the nature of reality in general. So that's where the Mahayana path stresses so much our commitment and our connection with others. We need this interaction with others to fully develop. We, of course, have some persons who sort of want to do it on their own, do it their way, and isolate themselves. And as long as we still see the world in terms of something that we're escaping from, we're still operating with a strong sense of self and other, and that duality prevents us from actually fully developing. Traleg Kyabgon says, the point is that from our side, if we're thinking about relating to others in a positive way, then we become richer as a person, and that is the key. The reward of relating well with others is found in how we grow within our understanding of and generosity towards others, and how we grow and develop ourselves. So this attitude is really one that is basic to our entire engagement with the Dharma, but also, and what's the point here is, it's also key in us relating, you could say, successfully with the world. Now, it's not that we just are in one way or another. We are actually according to the actions, the way that we handle our body, the way we handle our speech, and particularly how we handle our mind, that shapes what we are. And when we are in control to the extent that we're beginning to be constructive with our actions, then we discover how significant and meaningful our life becomes. And this is very much on the basis of these actions, on the actions of us. So we're not stuck in one way or another. We don't have to jealously look at others who have good lives the way we would want it and envy them. But actually, we're sitting right here with our particular body, speech, and mind, and we're empowered naturally to create the conditions for a richer life. Now, this is all about this shaping of ourselves in terms of our generosity and compassion and so forth is not about, this is not about how we are seen by others. The perception of others is really secondary. Sometimes we think that we exist through the perception of others. Sometimes people even say, oh, when I die, I live on in the memory of others. Well, sure, there might be somebody who remembers us for a very short time. In case they happen to think about us, yeah, sure, that's fine. But it's not exactly how our mind is not really functioning like that. That's happening already now. If you want that, then it's already happening right now. And so what really matters is what we're doing with ourselves. And that's where we have what we call in the Lojong teachings the primary witness, and that's ourselves. Only us really know the value of what's happening inside. So if we're developing compassion, it doesn't help that somebody sees us as compassionate. We might actually just be making a show. But if we genuinely are compassionate, then whether others see us or not, that's secondary. So basically, what we're understanding here is the way that we narrow our mind based on our insecure fixation on self. And that's where we would say by not conceptualizing and fixating too much, not getting hung up, then we enjoy life more. We connect more with reality. So we need discerning. We need to be smart. We need to have that prajna that distinguishes what is beneficial and what is not. And the degree to which we're open to the world and sensitive to the needs of others, and also intelligently work with our circumstances instead of just powering on aggressively with our particular wants, then we're able to actually discern what is constructive, what is destructive, what is beneficial and what is not. So this is what we call discriminating awareness. Now, sometimes we have discrimination in the sense of distinguishing this from that, and that's sort of an ordinary discrimination and fixation. That's not particularly imbued with awareness. That's more just a reactive pattern that we have, and very often how we discriminate, how we fixate, that's far from awareness. That's in fact just very often ignorantly. It's narrow-minded and so forth. So discriminating awareness really just implies that we begin to see clearly. It's discernment. It's wisdom, but it's appreciating the phenomena. So ordinarily, our concepts and fixation gets between us and our reality. So very often our preconceived ideas, this is how it is, and that gets between us and the actual thing. We fail to see what is actually there. So when we get fussy, when we are difficult, when we refuse actually to relate with things and rather we're just fixated on how things are, then we're not even really relating with the world. We're actually just stuck within our own particular narrow optics of what we want. And that's where we miss out engaging with what is there. Traleg Kyabgon says, a more relaxed, less fixated view of how things should be gives us a richer experience of life generally. Okay, I'm getting a message here. Maybe you can see it too, where it says there's the speed is not too big, so I'm gonna turn off the webcam. Okay. Okay. Yeah. All right. Doesn't matter. Yeah. Main thing is the text. So I hope that's all right. Yeah. How's the sound, by the way? Okay. Well, look, main thing is the sound. So look, if the sound is okay, then that's the most important. Okay, great. Okay, glad to hear that. Sound is good. So, okay, so as we said, a more relaxed, less fixated view of how things should be gives us a richer experience of life generally. For example, my excellent audience here, nobody seems to be upset about the absence of video. So you already clearly have a relaxed, less fixated view about whether or not there should be a video. So this, of course, applies in a very wide context. Traleg Kyabgon continues. That approach is also a form of discrimination. In Buddhism, it is not about making a choice between discrimination and non-discrimination. It is a choice between discrimination with attachment, grasping, and clinging, and discrimination without attachment, grasping, and clinging, or at least with less attachment, grasping, and clinging. Then our mind becomes less disturbed and perturbed. So it's not as if all of a sudden we say, well, red and green, it's all just one, you know. Yes, red, bright red is bright red and bright green is bright green. We see that. But we're not being insulted because we're getting some green instead of some red. So that's where we can see clearly, having not being, you could say, being less fixated doesn't mean that all of a sudden we become vague. Okay. I think it'll be fine without the video. Be all right. Now, anger, if not managed well, grows over time. So that's something that kicks in when we begin to have, when we've hardwired ourselves, right? If we've laid down vasanas, if we've laid down habitual patterns, if we've sort of laid down the track, then it becomes more and more sort of a rut that we're stuck in. And that's where it's so important that we actually deal with things like anger or whatever, the particular klesha that you could say dominates us, or regardless that any of the kleshas actually, that it's so important that we manage these. If we get stuck in a condition like anger, then we become resentful, and also we have a hard time getting along with people. We have this sort of like hardcore, grumpy, sort of Scrooge-like persons who have actually suffer a lot. I mean, one thing is we might complain about them, but of course they also really suffer. And so what happens is that when we have this kind of anger, we don't forgive others, we're resentful, grumpy, our life becomes diminished. So it's not as if by being angry at the world, we're going to, forge ahead and get what we want. We have a smaller life. And Traleg Kyabgon's point then also is that our resentment, it really only hurts ourselves. Others are not hurt by our resentment. We sit there and we harbor that. It sits, like Shantideva says, outer enemies can only do that much, but the real enemy that we keep in our heart, that can really bring us down. So as we are the only victim, then we want to learn not to grasp and cling. That's what we're training in. So this is not about us subscribing to Buddhist belief about karma. It's really just this seeing, and again, coming back to a verifiable science, it's about seeing what our actions do to us. So it's about knowing how patterns of action stay with us and harm us. The results of our actions, the karmic result, is based on causes and conditions. Now, what we refer to as the karmic result is then the seed that we put down, but then the seed is sort of together with a number of causes and conditions then manifests in various ways. So it's not as if there's just one action that leads to one result. That's such an important point. Again, I'd like to refer to Traleg Kyabgon's work on karma, where he really explains this very well. But the point is, there is not a predictable or predetermined relationship between an action and its results. And then in some traditions, mind you, I've spoken with some Hindu scholars, and it's not all Hindu traditions that subscribe to that, but there is sometimes, and especially in some of the older scriptures, it would say this action leads to that result. So that's where, certainly in Buddhism, we don't just look at the cause, but also as the various conditions. It's like we have a seed. And that's sure, it will give a rice plant or an apple tree or whatever, but also it depends a lot about how much sun it gets, what kind of soil it's planted in, and many other conditions. So that's where the law of karma is not some sort of simplistic way of just saying, oh yeah, you do this and that happens, or this happened because of this and that, you know? That's sort of a sad diminishing of the understanding of karma. Traleg Kyabgon says, karma is important, and it is important to respect it. When it comes to desire and the dimension of human experiences, apart from the Buddhist doctrinal side of things, there is a practical component to that, which can generate positive and uplifting behavior. What Buddhism suggests we do, more often than not, what Buddhism suggests we do is, more often than not, what we would want to do even if we were not Buddhist. This appears to be true in many respects. And this is basic to, really, you could say, all of Buddhism, because it's not about the scriptures of Buddhism, it's about really looking at reality. You could say the Buddha did not invent Dharma. The Buddha did not invent Buddhism. The Buddha was a teacher who taught Dharma. The Buddha was someone who taught us how to see reality, understand reality, and sort of wake up to reality. Okay. Each person can select their own text size using the zoom percentage on the top of the screen. Yeah, you know that, right? You can sort of pull it up and down. Yeah, so you can do that, right? Yeah, thank you for that. By the way, just on a technical note, as some of you noticed, and this is terrible, this is because I'm moving around these days a little bit, and so just where I'm living, I'm painting my room, so I'm sort of not, I don't have my laptop in the same place as I normally have it, and so I didn't notice that my Dropbox folder was not operative, and so it wasn't actually there were days before I actually realized a few people texted me or emailed me that it hadn't synchronized. So the files were in the folder from my side, but it hadn't synchronized to the web. So apologies for that. Now another thing is that you got a link, and this is your kind of guinea pigs, but I've never done this before. But there's a link that takes you to a website from Citrix, the people who run our webinars, and there the webinar is automatically published too. So it should automatically go up there. So you have there the video recording. Yeah. Normally what I do is actually I rip the video so you also have audio for those of you who want to listen to just the audio. Okay. All right. That was chapter 3. Chapter 4. A wrong view and a right view to satisfying desire. Now, wrong view and right view, they have really key terms. And what we're talking about is, again, coming back to prajna, to the intelligent way of approaching things. And of course, we definitely would want to satisfy our desire. The only thing is, when we're confused, what we do doesn't necessarily bring about satisfaction. If we follow habitual desire, it doesn't necessarily bring satisfaction. So here we're going to look at how we actually could handle desire and in general handle all circumstances in a way that brings freedom. Traleg Kyabgon says, even though we need to go beyond grasping and fixation, that does not necessarily mean that we have to go beyond desire. And this is something we also saw in the first chapters, that what we're saying with desire in Buddhism is not that it goes away, but it's just that we channel, you could say there's a life force that we have, we channeled it intelligently. Now, as probably we know, unmanaged desire leads to ruin and self-destruction. If you if you just follow your wants, if you just purely follow ego, it actually, we spiral downwards. And that's actually the nature of samsara. That's the unfortunate nature of this, of just following ego, actually is that we spiral downwards. And that happens in samsara. That's also why we say the lower realms are so heavily populated, simply because left to its own devices, ego actually goes completely amok and really takes us into a dreadful place. So when in the human realm, we can see this. Of course, when people just follow their wants, they very often end up with addictions. They end up with some very, you could say, self-destructive patterns. So that's where, even on an ordinary secular level, we need to manage ourselves. We need to manage our desires. We're taught that. There's social contracts, there's sort of general ethical guidelines and the guidelines in terms of how to run our lives that prescribe this. So here, however, desire as a tool of transformation plays a role in spiritual practice. We can actually see this drive that we have, and if we take this drive just out of wanting to achieve short-lived satisfaction or short-sighted objectives, and we're looking more in terms of liberation, enlightenment, and so forth, then desire has a very important role, particularly because our willpower, our determination, our bodhicitta, our wish for temporary ultimate happiness for ourselves and others is driven by desire. So there's a lot of, you could say, strength and spirit in the path. And in a way, the more we have of that spirit, the more we progress on the path. Now, strong desire generates strong feelings. So that happens. We have strong desire, and of course, as ordinary sentient beings, we have strong desires in terms of what we want. We want things, we want status, we want to engage with other people, and so forth. So there's this karmic disposition towards desire that generates strong sentiments and feelings. However, that if we handle that strength that is part of our being, it doesn't necessarily lead to clinging, grasping, and fixation. And that's where, when we're practitioners and if we're subscribing to the path, if we're aspiring to Dharma, then we could say that a conscious cultivation can transform desire into strong positive energy. So if we begin to direct this towards liberation, towards the benefiting of others, towards the purification of our perceptions, and the path itself requires a strong application. And so if we put our desire into that, then it can create very strong positive energy. The thing is, grasping and clinging comes from a not fully conscious state. This also we can see, if we were to just follow ego, we become incredibly dull and self-absorbed and cut off. And we can also see that when we follow down the path of grasping and clinging, we actually begin to look down. We forget to look up, we begin to lose connection. And so we're not really there. The path itself is really about opening up, being awake, being conscious. That's what we mean with Buddha, the fully awake, the awakened one. So this samsaric mind operates with a semi-conscious state, like half sleep. For that reason, we could say samsara is a half-life. It's not. We might think that, oh yeah, we can get some cheap thrills in indulging ourselves a little bit, but actually, it's just on the premise of this half-asleep condition, and it's very sort of unimaginative perspective. So the point is, as long as we are stuck within this ignorant condition, we don't really understand what's going on. This is basic, you know. The sage understand what's going on. The sage, you might plonk the sage down in, in the middle of London. And the sage might not really know what's sort of happening in terms of, those strange double-decker buses and those strange cabs and people with funny hats being the police and so on. But that doesn't really matter, because the sage actually has this confident quality of being very open and relating very simply and directly. So the understanding that we're talking about here is not really about information, but it's about being awake. Positive desire enables us to overcome grasping. So the application of the path, application of wisdom, and so forth is something that opens us up and takes us out of this semi-conscious condition of grasping. Moreover, we need to overcome fixation, which is the root of grasping. We looked at that last time. The condition of fixation is, like Traleg was saying, it's sort of an underlying conceptual attitude that then informs the sort of more gross level of grasping. But then again, it is, I have to say, it's a little bit sort of used, how do you say, intermittently, back and forth. But we certainly would want to pay attention to this fixation, which lies at the bottom of all our ways of operating with desire and grasping. And to get to the bottom of things, we need to develop then what we call the right view. That's a greater understanding. Right now, our understanding is barely informed. Very often we're sort of expected to figure life out by ourselves. Very often education, as we have it in a modern context, is more about behavior and more about data, and very little actually in order to how to handle our lives in terms of our being. Of course, there's some, you could say, implicit messages we receive through our culture and our upbringing, but an actual science around these things is not always that readily available. Certainly in Buddhism, we're very keen on understanding reality, because that really is what provides us to begin to connect with reality, just for the simple reason of our happiness. Forget about enlightenment, but just being able to handle ourselves in terms of being satisfied or temporarily happy. So Traleg Kyabgon says, overcoming the tendency to grasp and cling is derived from learning to overcome fixation. This comes from the cultivation of what is often called right view in Buddhism. Grasping, clinging, and fixation are connected to what we call wrong view. The mindset of non-attachment, non-grasping, and non-clinging, unpolluted by the excessive experience of anger, resentment, bitterness, egotism, and self-centeredness, leads to non-fixated and non-grasping mind states. That is, non-grasping, non-clinging, and non-attachment, and so forth, are associated with a right view. The intermingling of attachment and grasping with jealousy, self-centeredness, egoism, resentment, bitterness, and so on, these are associated with wrong view. In Buddhism, then, in order to overcome fixation, we need to adopt the right view to counter the wrong view. So this has nothing to do with doctrine, but is really just about being smart, being intelligent, seeing what's going to promote our well-being and what's going to diminish our well-being, what's going to connect us with a more full experience and what is going to diminish our experience. So wrong view is what ruins our attempts at happiness. Us fixating when phenomena, they aren't such that you can actually hold them, we're gonna collide with reality, and that ruins our attempts at happiness. Thinking that getting what we desire will bring satisfaction is wrong view. So that's where we're sort of traveling down the wrong track when we just follow our wants. This belief, this wrong view, makes things worse. This is where we are ignorantly pursuing something that is only going to bring us exact opposite of what we actually want. So just to be clear, wrong view intensifies grasping and fixation. Meditation and mindfulness, however, addresses and corrects wrong view. Now, this wrong view is something that we, like I said before, it's something that we very often in sort of social context, societal context, through our upbringing and culture and so forth, that we have certain, you could say, moral guidelines, some degree of moral compass or social contracts. But actually, yes, they hold back our most gross grasping and our most gross sort of self-centered pursuing of desire. But to actually really get down at where fixation, grasping and fixation originates, that's getting down into the mind that wants, and the insecure mind that believes itself and its own thoughts and its own wants. And it's actually only through the practice of meditation where we begin to really become conscious, that we begin to actually be able to correct and address these, so this sort of undercurrent of impulses that very often drive us. So we need that kind of conscious experience of meditation in order to actually be able to handle the undertow of impulses that generally drive us. So that's then where we begin to correct this wrong view and we begin to have the right view. And this right view then brings the transcendental view, which is no view. The thing is, eventually, as we begin to rise above the confusion of our mind, then there's a sort of ease with which we relate to reality. And that's where we finally, actually, just by remaining aware, we actually don't need the rules. We actually have a pure, you could say, ethical conduct that's not informed by, you could say, a script or rules of any kind. And that's where we then ultimately talk about no view. But this is, as you will have known from reading this chapter, this is subtle, and we need to be quite clear about what we exactly mean with going beyond the view. Traleg says this is my points here, but the point he's making is to think that no view means we don't need to have a view is a mistake. And sometimes, you have these kind of rather naive sort of readings of some of the Buddhist teachings that sort of speak about, the nature of reality being beyond any kind of reference points of any kind. Then you think, oh yeah, well, I'm just going straight for the real deal here. I don't need all this sort of gradual stuff and all that sort of cultural, baggage of Buddhism. I'm just going to go straight into, the ultimate view. I'm just going to subside and in natural freedom, and I don't need any rules. And that's where there's a little bit of a naive and very intellectual, very cerebral perspective that then completely misleads us. So this, it's true, transcendence of view is indeed beyond right and wrong view. That's true, but we can't adopt the transcendence of view as some new idea. That's just an idea. It doesn't actually connect with what we're living. It's just sort of, it makes sense if we're just sitting and caught up in our own sort of thoughts. It's pretty cool thoughts, for sure. But in terms of us relating to who we are and working with what we are, then it's about relating to our present conditions, our present habitual patterns and so on. And that's where we require, in terms of transforming ourselves, we require a gradual path of actually transforming experience, not just ideas. And that's again where the Buddha very compassionately taught the path of meditation, where we actually have a context and a structure where we can actually become more conscious of what's happening with ourselves. And this is where we begin to see, the sort of discern what is the wrong view, what is the confusion that drives us, and not be sort of naively subscribing to that. And also through meditation, then as a consequence, then we cultivate the right view. And eventually then we go beyond the view. So as we become wiser, less prone to sort of spiraling down into our fixation, then things open up and we begin to have a greater way of dealing with the world through the meditation and also through post-meditation practice of acting in accordance with reality, which is essentially what's implicit in ethics and Buddhist ethics. It's actually enabling us to sort of have a greater experience. But ultimately, yes, then of course the predicament of confusion falls away, and that's where at that point we don't need the corrective of rules and regulations, and that's where we can talk about going beyond the view. Traleg just says, in essence, wrong view does not reveal truth about the human condition. In Buddhism, what is true is not just propositional truth. What is true is measured in terms of our human experience. In particular, regarding views that perpetuate our samsaric existence, or alternatively, views that can progressively lead to liberation, it is considered that what is true leads to liberation and enlightenment, and what is false leads to samsaric imprisonment. That which perpetuates our delusory mental states is considered the wrong view. So again, this is coming down to, you could say, that which is empirical, verifiable, which is scientific and having nothing to do with the teachings of the Buddha as a dogma, but rather it has to do with the teachings of the Buddha as a science and an observation of what happens in terms of our experience. And this is universal experience. This is not just the Buddha teaching to some Indians at the time, but something that's universal. So the moment that we're perpetuating aggression, that we're perpetuating hatred within our own mind, we're going to be struggling with reality, because it will be us. There will be a strong sense of me against the other, and that's what drives this aggression. The moment that we begin to dissolve that, and we begin to practice gentleness and openness and connecting, and there's a gentle, wider perspective that opens up, then we're no longer battling with reality. So it has nothing to do with Buddhist teaching as such. It has to do with us actually aligning ourselves with reality. And that's where we then would say aligning ourselves with reality is what we call right view. Us sort of stubbornly pursuing an agenda of ignorance is what we consider the wrong view. When you say understanding reality, this is implying that what we call our reality is biased, partial, hence we are part living or part experiencing the potential of life. Well, the thing is, the degree to which we begin to practice what let's use the vocabulary we've just learned here. The more we have right view, the less biased we are. And so, yes, we do have a personal experience of our particular reality, but the more actually that we have right view, the less actually our bias, the less narrow our bias becomes. And you can say awakening, or even just on the path, there's a gradual opening up to reality that is less biased and less partial. So this is where we begin to connect with our potential. Yeah. So I think everyone has heard of the Four Noble Truths, and in fact, there's never ever a time actually where there's anything in the Buddhist teaching that is not really connected to the Four Noble Truths. It's about understanding that there's a problem, but that problem is not just randomly there. It comes about due to causes, and the problem is fixable. So we have the problem, suffering, we have the cause, we have cessation in the sense that it can be remedied, and then we have the application of what remedies it. So basically, the practical aspect of then solving the problem. So all of the Buddhist teaching operates within this framework of the Four Noble Truths. This is universal to Buddhism across all cultures, and it's also universal really in terms of our existence and our lives. Anyway, the Four Noble Truths, hence, they're not abstract, they're not philosophy, they're about, particularly then in the Buddhist path, we're not about attaining enlightenment because, we'd like to do something great. It's about, we're suffering. We don't actually have even the luxury to think, oh, I'm a very sort of emancipated, sophisticated person, and I'd like to be even more glorious. It's not about that. It's the situation is a bit more desperate than that. We're actually crazed, delusional, mad, and perpetuating our own madness. And we finally, there's a straw we can hang on to, and presently within this human life, there's a possibility actually of doing something, which is the path of the Dharma, and connecting with or opening up to reality, not being stuck in our madness. So the doctor's there. There's a cure. Oh gosh. Yikes. Sorry, just want to verify that it's actually. That's right. Someone has been listening in class. There's a there's a problem. It's caused, and it can be Hello. How does it sound now? Can you hear me? Yeah, it looks as if the sound is back. Oh gosh. Huh? Sometimes the technical issues here, it gets a bit dramatic sometimes, huh? I actually thought the whole computer had completely crashed and I had to reboot, so I'm glad that we have the sound and so forth. Perfect sound. Okay. Alrighty, well, I guess we can proceed then. So, yes, as somebody pointed out then, we had a problem. We recognized the cause. It was a solvable problem, and we have proceeded to put an end to this problem. So that's what we're talking about when we talk about the Four Noble Truths, yeah? And this, of course, is connected to the wrong view. So basically what we're saying with the wrong view, that is what is false produces ignorance and the afflicted states of suffering. So the first of all, what really the wrong view is, first of all, is not understanding suffering and thinking what is actually suffering is bliss, and not understanding what causes the suffering. We pursue the cause of suffering, and that of course leads to a continual in sort of being caught by suffering and perpetuating suffering. So it's the exact opposite. Right view, however, and that's where Traleg's point is, that what is true cleans our mind and frees us from all disturbances, akushala, which are sort of the afflicted mental states, disturbing mental states. So that's where we begin to gradually become free through the cleaning up of the mind, and having cultivated the right view, you could say, the path, that too needs to be transcended. I mean, the whole understanding of the path is that it's expedient means to go beyond the whole ocean of suffering and samsara. And that's where we would say, once you reach the other side, you don't need to keep carrying your vessel, your boat with you. So for us then, this means that we have this gradual process of a right view, understanding what's true, what's in alignment with reality, and that remedies the wrong view. And then we have the no view that remedies the right view. So ultimately then the nature of the path is also going beyond even the prescriptive aspects of the path. Traleg Kyabgon says there is a tremendous level of fixation involved with wrong view. That is, we have deep and strong attachments to our views. We cherish our strongly held views and belief. This can be corrected by the cultivation of right view, sama ditti, to reduce or lessen our level of fixation. So right view is connected to a more subtle form of fixation. This subtle fixation can be overcome through the notion of the transcendence of all views. So right view is continually working towards lesser degrees of fixation, and ultimately even the view is something we needn't fixate on. Now, there's a very important point. This, of course, runs throughout this discussion, is that there's a big difference between an intellectual understanding and direct experience. So we can have an understanding, but to actually engage with what is being talked about in the teaching, we are not just accumulating information, we're transforming our person. So not understanding the impermanent and insubstantial nature of reality, we have wrong view. Now, that's fairly obvious. Now, the wrong view then is remedied by the understanding of dependent arising. And dependent arising is really a key term, because that is where we begin to open up and go beyond the idea of reality as something fixed and begin to see it as part of a web of causes and conditions. That reality doesn't actually exist in one particular way. We are only seeing snippets or our version of reality. And the degree to which we begin to see dependent arising is beginning to connect with the naturally conditioned nature of all phenomena. Actually, you have it, just because I was listening to a lecture today on quantum physics, you have what's called the um, the the, um, the wave breakdown, in which you would say that all the reality within quantum physics, we say it's really just a realm of possibilities, and it's us who actually solidify reality through our particular participation as observers. And that's where we talk about the wave, the quantum breakdown, where that's actually where all of a sudden we fixate. We fixate on reality in one way or another. And of course, quantum physics is sort of works with trying to develop an understanding of that, where you could say in Buddhism, we're saying that it's neither one way or another. It's not as if nature exists in one particular way, and we're only getting a sort of a small understanding of it, or a small version of it. But we're actually saying, thanks to the phenomena being dependent, it has no ultimate reality. When we see, say, dependent arising, we're actually saying that phenomena are empty of inherent existence. So this runs contrary to our wrong view, which is ignoring the dependent nature of phenomena and just fixating on it being in one way or another. Apologies for that. Forgot to put my phone on silence. If I had been in a cinema, I would have been, I don't know, kicked out. Anyway, okay. So we established right view through understanding dependent arising. This is really key to Vipassana, or wider perspective in Buddhism, and this is tied up with what we call developing prajna. Dependent arising, or praticca samutpada, is really what enables us to have right view. So this is universal, and it is really what we call the lion's roar of the Buddha's teaching, this view of dependent arising. It is what tells us phenomena are empty of the reality that we attribute to it, and it opens up to a much greater reality that's free from our sort of habitual fixation. So as much as this is a word and all of that, and it maybe even sounds philosophical and so on, it is so much about us. It's so much a message about the nature of reality. So through the right view, we free the mind, we become light and flexible. So when we have this understanding of dependent arising, we have the right view. Ultimately, we will go beyond any view and realize the transcendence of views. Hence, that is where then this is not something we can just sort of adopt glibly by repeating it or sort of subscribing to it as if it was some sort of political movement or some belief. This is about actual experience, and that's where Traleg Rinpoche makes this point about understanding the distinguishing between an intellectual understanding, which might be very helpful, might be rational, it might be very useful, and then experience and realization. Actually, in Tibetan, we call this Goa, Nyongwa, and Tokpa, which are these three stages. The first we understand, then we begin to have some experience, and then with realization, we no longer slip into delusion. So realization is when we fully realize something. Traleg Rinpoche says, Dharma knowledge or understanding how the world works is not the same as having the experience of how the world works. As long as there is a perspective on how we are seeing what we experience, we are looking at it from a deluded or tainted, impure position. When we experience directly how the world arises and dissipates, there is no need for praticca samutpada, or the dependent arising viewpoint. However, until we get there, then this viewpoint is quite helpful. So with experience and realization, we experience, meaning we don't just have an idea, but we actually experience dependent arising directly. Now, ordinarily, our filters impose a delusional version of the world in the sense that us with our particular view on reality, like we were talking about before, we just have a biased or partial understanding of the world. For us to begin to open up and be free of this, then we train in the view of impermanence and dependent arising. We begin to understand how things are not lasting the way we think that they might be, or that we sort of fixate on. And ultimately, we begin to see they don't actually even have a reality in and of themselves. Doesn't mean they don't appear, but they don't have the solid reality that we attribute to them. So for us to be free, we need to begin to familiarize ourselves with this particular view. And this, through the practice of this, you could say, training the mind and also meditation, brings about a different experience. We also have to let go of right view, as this can have varying degrees of fixation. You know, if we didn't let go of the right view, we would ultimately become dogmatists. And that's the beauty of the middle way, or the Madhyamika. You know, at the end of the Madhyamika Avatara, there's a place where Chandrakirti says, you know, unless you have this view, you're never going to get enlightened. And you might think, oh, Chandrakirti is really narrow-minded because he is becoming really sort of fundamentalist. You have to have my view, or else you're not going to get enlightened. But Chandrakirti's point is actually, unless you're completely free, and that's the whole point of the Madhyamika and the Prasangika Madhyamika view, unless you're completely free of any fixation, you're still going to have some reference points, and that's still going to be the seed of your you could say, your fall, your delusion. So in that sense, the whole middle way point is really that we ultimately need to go completely free of any kind of fixation of any kind, and that is going even beyond any view. So that's where that's why this is the point of Madhyamika and the entire issue around the view, the Prajna Paramita as well. So we can notice how we each uphold personal ideas about things. The thing is, we can actually understand the view more when we begin to understand how we actually confused personally. Then we can see in the tension between the two, we can begin to see, isn't it interesting that I'm so rigid about certain things, you know? You know, I might have, you know, conviction about, you know, some things, you know, whatever, in my political view, or my sort of my pet peeves, and you know, all of that. And so so this is where we could begin to see the toxic quality of our rigidity around that. Traleg Kyabgon says, normally we're fixated with the notion of the self, identity, and difference or separateness. Without having necessarily done any explicit philosophical reflections, we have certain ideas and beliefs about who we are, and we develop fixation and certainty around who we are. So this is sort of pre-reflexive, and it's also pre-reflective. It's nothing to do with philosophy. It's just basic. We're born with that, and that is the sense of me. And that's where we could have different views about how we're related to our body and mind, this body-mind complex. That's where and this is not philosophy, this is really just, we do this. At least the first two certainly have, it's very sort of, you could say, basic. So we might believe ourself is the same as the body and mind, which is saying, me, body and mind, yeah, that's me. Then again, we might, if we look at it, that would be a little bit funny, because that means I have how many body parts? I'll have that many selves. And, you know, the mind is always changing, the body is always changing. So if we look at it, it's obviously a flawed assumption, but it's there, isn't it? Then we might think ourself is different from the body and mind, because we can say, well, I'm not, you know, I'm not my nose, my toes, I'm not, you know, any of the body parts, and the mind is always changing, whereas I have a sense of self that's very enduring and permanent. So we can see that the notions of it's the same as or the different from, it doesn't really apply. Then also we might have this notion that our self is something that's entirely based on the body. For example, we might say, oh, I'm the brain. That's essentially the materialist view. Or we might begin to say that whatever there is all my mind that's creating it. And that's what we call idealism. Now, in Buddhism, when you're studying this is basically what we call the Jigsaw-tawa, or the view of transitory collection. And we usually would say that if we hook these up with the 5 skandhas, then we have the 5 skandhas, which each of these 4 varieties, we then have what's called the 20 view of the transitory collection. Actually, we refer to them as the what is again the towering 20 peaks of the view of the transitory collection, because they're very persistent. Anyway, these views, this is not philosophy, because even though we're here sort of giving it some labels, the thing is, this view of me as being my body, there's me worrying about getting old and my body's, falling apart. Or then there's a sense that, well, my experience of the self is something other than the body and the mind. All of these, they come with strong emotional habitual responses. We hold very strongly onto these. Somebody insults me, I'm really, I hold this identity of sense of self take it very seriously, right? And we get very hung up on things. So Traleg just says, from a Buddhist point of view, all fixations are developed from these binary concepts of either or either the same or different. Either something's there or it's not. Yeah. Our thought patterns support and uphold our conceptual formulations through affirmation and negation. These thought patterns cause fixation. That is, we fixate on the notion of oneness or lack of difference or separation. Or we fixate on the notion of separation and difference. So we very often have this sense that, is it there? Is it not there? I'm happy if it's there, if it exists. I'm upset if it doesn't exist. Or I'm relieved that it doesn't exist. Or, and so forth. So in this sense, we very much operate with the way that we fixate things in a way they actually don't exist. This is something, to be honest, as somebody who's been sort of dabbling in this for years, when we hear this first time, it seems a bit odd. But we can try and look and see how we are always scrambling towards solidifying phenomena. And that's where we can say the truth of life is that things are not just one way or another. These are sort of you can say slightly childish sort of attempts at solidifying things that actually have very little to do with the way things are. So the more we understand dependent arising, the more we understand the constructed nature of things, the less we fall for this tendency. And particularly, it also requires the practice of meditation for us to begin to let go of this. It's not something that just is sort of done intellectually and that easy. So the way that we solidify things as real is what drives our strong feelings and reactions. When we think of things in terms of we have this or we don't have that, this is very much something that gives us very strong emotions. So on the basis of that, then this is where the desire, the anger, and so forth, all of these come from. We get attached to our desires, our opinions, our beliefs, ideologies, positions, etc. Like we're always talking about religion and fundamentalism, how it drives wars between people, even though it's just ideas, right? So these ideologies and beliefs become very important. So this is what we intend to remedy by the right view, which is where we begin to see that phenomena, they don't actually possess any ultimate reality, and we begin to see they exist merely as imputed appearances that we label in a particular way. Now, us looking at this challenges the idea of things as existing solidly in one way or another. So it's where we begin to see this that brings about some peace when we begin to not be too caught up in our beliefs, in our rigid way of seeing things. That's a good person, that's a bad person. This is really good, that's really bad. This situation happening right now is completely unacceptable. But then again, we find out, oh, the unacceptable situation actually worked out to our benefit. Or this is really good. It turns out that actually at the end wasn't really that good. So there's not as if things exist the way that we impute them. And that's where we begin to be less sort of naively caught up in terms of all these things that we're continually reacting to. So that's where, on the basis of us developing the right view, we see phenomena beyond the two extremes of affirmation and negation, which is like, it is this way or it's not this way. Basically what we call existence and non-existence. The world actually things never really come into existence. They don't exist in the first place. And so there's not really an existence taking place. There's also not really a non-existence taking place. All of these are just labels that we impute. Reality itself doesn't really, from its own side, have this as a reality. Things themselves don't have, from my hand side, there's not the notion I am a hand. It's just me imputing the name of that. Actually, if I look, then that's again what dependent arising is about, is we begin to see, is there a hand the way that we think there is? That's just really causes and conditions that we're labeling in a particular way. So, Traleg Kyabgon says, from a Buddhist point of view, getting fixated on either of these extremes is a wrong view. Right view or dependent arising allows us to see the world for what it is. It's real enough, but the world does not present itself in the way that we think it does. The world cannot be experienced outside our mind because we can only experience the world using our mind. We can say the world exists, but our apprehension of it is not objective. It is subjective. It is subject to our perspective and how we apprehend and experience the world. It does not exist of its own accord as we experience it. The world arises in relation to ourself, in relation to the subject who has these experiences. Natural phenomena arise in the world due to causes and conditions. When the right causes and conditions come together, it allows certain things to arise. But that exists independently of the way that we attribute labels and value to them. Then there's a question, what is the view called in reference to self different from body and mind? Well, this is just one of the sets that what we call, this view is called the view of the transitory collection. So what we're just talking about here are collections that we then try to label in terms of either being identical with the collection or different from the collection. So it falls under this classification that we call the view of the transitory collection. So that's a little bit of a piece of terminology, but it is then what this is what it refers to. Actually, last year I did a course. It was called Contemplating Reality, which actually went into quite some depth about this. And I'd actually recommend that, Contemplating Reality. It's written by a student of Chögyam Trungpa. It's called Andy Carr, and also a student of Khenpo Tsultrim Gyatso. And he's very good at, you could say, presenting Buddhist philosophy, Buddhist science, in a way that it makes it very understandable for modern persons. Andy Carr, Contemplating Reality. Okay, now, understanding dependent origination, that everything appears through causes and conditions, remedies fixation. Okay, remember that. That's the key word for developing right view. Traleg says fixation means we get fixated on the singularity of things, that we single out particular characteristics and then get fixated on that. All appearances that we perceive arise as a web of dependent arising. So for us to begin to see the problem with us just fixating on a particular angle of things, let's say we're talking with somebody about a third person. Let's say I'm talking with Susan about Joe, and I see Joe in a particular way and Susan sees Joe in a completely different way. It's because I'm focusing on one aspect and she's noticing another aspect. So it's not that either of these are not true, but the thing is they're all true in their relative sense. And when we begin to understand that things are just perceived in what we could call a relative truth, then we also begin to see that it's a construct on the basis of essentially conditions. And that's where we begin to say all these perceptions, all these appearances, they arise out of this web of dependent arising. When we fixate, we're latching on to specific aspects. And like I was just saying, others might fixate differently. So the relative world is infinitely complex and multifaceted. This is not particularly complicated, but it's just essential for us to actually navigate reality, is to see that our particular angle, seeing a particular object, doesn't necessarily exist. Our perception does not exist in the object. It's really just the way that we're perceiving it. That just leaves us open. That leaves us open to somebody else saying something different, because we realize that reality is perceived relative to who we are. And the degree to which we have less and less this fixation, then we begin to be more and more open to what we could call then the unconditional or the ultimate truth about reality. Finally, you could say ultimate truth is the falling away of any kind of this latching on or fixation. Traleg says there are many interconnecting events and fields arising at any given time. Not only that, but whatever has arisen does not stay, is not stable. So what we have seen and become fixated upon may have disappeared. However, our fixation may still remain intact or even become stronger. Ha. So we might begin to see this, but then again, we might understand this, but it's continually a process of us actually working with this fixation. So that's why we don't just have a sort of a one-shot solution to samsara. We actually have a path. There needs to be a way, or rather we need to relate to the way that we habitually are stuck to some extent and work with that. The good news is that the ground itself is free of that. So we're continually becoming more and more connected to a ground that is free of confusion. So it's a very workable situation, but nevertheless, we have to work with the existing limitations. Yeah. Okay. Try and put on the webcam. Okay, any questions at this point? Yes. Could you say more about how fixation is more subtle and harder to work with than grasping and clinging? I often hear people say things like, just don't fixate on it, but it's not so helpful, especially when working with others who are traumatized, working with addiction, or even myself when I'm not in a great place. I want to be sensitive to others when they are suffering. So what we do when when we limit ourselves, or when we try to stop ourselves from just being, in terms of our behavior, you could say, we stop ourselves from grasping and clinging. So that's you could say on a level of just being sensible and doing the right thing. And that's also where this kind of proverbial cliche about don't fixate, or people say, well, just let it go, or whatever. That's more on the behavior level. That we can, this is just tentatively, you could say, we can refer to it like that. Fixation, however, that's more the underlying assumption about how things actually are. And that's where what we were just looking at here in terms of dependent arising. With dependent arising, we begin to actually penetrate these assumptions we have about how things actually are. So we might think, I should be nice to that person because that person is such a difficult person. And so then we prevent ourselves from being grasping or clinging or whatever. We prevent ourselves from that. But the assumption is still the person is difficult. And so that's more an attitude or a concept that's underlying and informing our action. And similarly, also the sort of all the various moral practices we do about restraining our ego, they're all on the level of grasping and clinging. However, once we get through fixation, then we don't really need too many rules about grasping and clinging, because we actually understand that phenomena don't exist solidly as the way that we think they do. So the grasping and clinging doesn't even arise if we've remedied fixation at the very root. So I would say on the general level of us being agitated and so forth, then it's quite helpful to work with our grasping and clinging. But when we have opportunity, then we can work with the more subtle. That's what we do with the practice of meditation and working then with fixation. Continually, what runs as a red thread through this particular study, and what we were talking about here in terms of right view versus wrong view, is actually beginning to get to the bottom of our assumptions about the identity of things. Could you say something about Western guilt as a wrong view, clinging to ourselves as something bad, etc.? Well, yes, that's the whole, again, coming down to fixation, because unless we actually get down to the level of fixation and right view, we actually are operating from a place of saying, well, I'm a flawed person, and hence I need to contain myself. I need to stop my clinging and my grasping. That works in terms of just getting along in a society, but and in terms of us getting along in our everyday life, but the basic assumption hasn't been dealt with. And that's where right now we're approaching this very much from the point of view of just getting the picture and establishing the right view. But you see, when we begin to work with meditation, then we're actually also taking this into a place of softness, of basic goodness. And that's where the rigidity of wrong view is replaced by the softness of the right view. The sort of the narrowness of the wrong view is replaced by the openness of the right view. And that's where you could say we begin to actually breathe with more ease and begin to have a sense of our basic goodness and our basic value. And that's where the entire notion of guilt becomes less, because we understand, yes, we're flawed in one way or another, but there's also a degree of innocence. And if we've sort of been caught up in actions or perceptions that are wrong, this is coming from an innocent place of ignorance. So there's a softness that begins to replace this rigidity of the wrong view. And thank you for choosing this book. So many valuable lessons and great meditation master. Yeah. Okay. All right. Thank you for joining me here. Again, like I'm always saying, what I'm presenting here, you shouldn't think this is an accurate digest of what Traleg just says. Please do read the book. This is essential. Yeah. What you're just getting here, just some, as we've already been looked at, you're just getting some, I'm latching on to some aspects of what is being said. So please read the book as well. Thank you. Thank you very much. So, by this positive action, may all beings perfect the accumulation of merit and wisdom and attain the two supreme kayas which arise from merit and wisdom. So next time, please read the next two chapters, developing a liberated perspective and rationality and conviction. Thank you.